Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Housing Committee meeting. I'd like to call to order the Housing Committee meeting at 1:03 p.m. on April the 13th. Can we have an approval of the agenda, a recommendation that the Housing Committee meeting agenda for April the 13th, 2023 be approved as circulated? Can I move by Siobhan, seconded by Tia? Adoption of the minutes, if everyone's had a chance to read them. Recommendation that the minutes of the Housing Committee meeting held on January the 12th, 2023 be adopted. Malcolm, Siobhan, second. All in favor?
Missed it.
Missed it the first time.
I didn't even vote.
For twice. Thank you. Okay, we have some presentations here today, stakeholder presentations. And I'd like to welcome up first Jessica Klilkach, local realtor, property manager. And you're welcome to step up to the podium for your presentation.
My name is Jessica Klilkach. I'm a local realtor here in Sycamores, where I live and reside. I had a long-standing relationship with housing property, growing up in architecture, licenses in insurance, setting risk management business, property management, and now real estate trading and sales. It's almost been 2 decades, I guess now, and I'm in Yellowstone, British Columbia before, and moved here for 12 years. Was in Alberta before. I'm excited to be a part of the growth of Sycamores and what we have to offer. I do see some gaps in the realtor that we have in our housing markets, especially when it comes to residential housing. It's not happening in small groups. And of course, with the living real estate prices all around the country, so a lot of people getting priced out. For bringing content, but just me talking. So, is there a direction you'd like on the screen?
I think if you, do you have a presentation, like any?
I wasn't too sure about the guidelines.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay.
Make sure I'm headed down the right.
Yes, please continue.
When it comes to the housing lab, I definitely service vacancy rates. That is, as far as I can see, where we have not much available, people wanting to relocate to Australia. And a lot of times people, when they want to move to Marriott, they need to bring house one work. And as we start to grow, we need to provide having a representative on a few local land sales that are living in buildings. And they are very eager, and we have families in municipalities who are incredibly easy to deal with, which has been wonderful. The new recent changes being made to streamline application process, that has also been recognized by the government and spoken to, and there are shopping around the province for places to invest. Their feedback to me as we look at other properties that Sycamores has been wonderful when it comes to that application. I think that's feedback needs to recognize that the choices that are being made have been very positive. I can't talk personally about the developments, of course, until they've all been authorized and passed. But I do see an area where we need to improve, that is for professional representation and property management purposes. So to be a licensed property manager in British Columbia, you have the ability to rent out 23 units, and in order to do that legally, you must have a property management business. This is usually about a year-long course, followed by a licensing agreement being overseen by a broker. And this enables them to govern the law, what residents the type of. It's by no means follows under short-term rentals or vacancy rentals, but only the long-term tenancies, which can be a month. They can also be annual, governed by the provincial regulation, not these. Currently, we don't have any local property managers, and even Santa Ana has been licensed in the past. However, there are so many. And my intention is to help to get this license that we can provide this service. When we have affordable housing that comes in and we have developments that are being built, the developers want to know that the property has local management on emergencies such as a fire, flood, or working with any tenancy disputes that will occur with central tenants, or even placement of tenants in the qualifying process, including showings, credit reviews. This is a professional service that is provided by a full-time individual typically, and it can be, this is what I think we find, grow cost. I think with that, we'll be able to get more development, especially even single people that want to purchase, their revenue property, so that in the future, perhaps if they're retirement savings, they can benefit that way, or the larger developers. And that is what I have to say about the housing. I hope I don't a little bit of introduction.
Thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. Great input. And does anybody have any questions? Malcolm.
In your experience with builders and developers, is there anything they're saying that they'd like to see that local government or local councils not doing?
The feedback is varied, just depending on the size of development. I recently helped patients plan, and when it comes to the new densification, which was very well received, because we do have incredibly large lots and an opportunity to build some condensed housing lot for everyone. Next, I've been told, yet not confirmed, that we will have a little bit more of a streamlined application process. If you can understand, when they're looking to buy the land, typically only given 10 business days in the subject period of purchasing land to make a decision. This is on the smaller parcels. The larger, they can have a longer period of time. If there was some way to get to yes, this is a strong possibility that this that would really help with bringing it up.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Our new infill policy in bylaw 1000 allows for 4 units on one lot. So that'll help. And we're working towards plans you can pick up at the front desk that are approved for construction for garden suites or duplex or triplex or maybe a fourplex, whatever. So sort of like Kelowna's done in Nelson and a few communities. So those are, so they'll be pre-zoned and some, plans at the front desk pre-approved for construction. So that'll shorten the timelines and help in decisions maybe.
Yeah, I think those are all great steps to take. I really believe we're trending in the right direction, and we should be seeing more committed buildings very short.
Yes, Tia.
With the new zoning in the residential areas with the short-term rentals, have you seen an increase in as a property manager? Have you been, has that a change, in the short-term rentals, where those places are now available for long-term rentals? Have you seen any movement at all yet?
Just want to be sure I'm not a licensed property manager.
Okay, you aren't. Okay.
So, I didn't my license, and I'm now with the real estate trading license, but I answer questions about our.
Okay.
I think that the new bylaw has given buyers all across the board for investment purposes more confidence in purchasing and moving to the area because they have a clear definition of what they're buying. And that was really, really good. Does that answer the question?
I know it's early, as far as the, this has just occurred, and just interested to see as a realtor or anything, like if you've had inquiries for people actually looking for long-term rentals and if they're being able to be fulfilled.
I do receive inquiries definitely for rentals.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't, I usually field them to the Facebook site at this point in time because you don't have any professional local management.
Right.
And most of them have been self-managed. And then there is some other management occurring and so it's really up to the tenant to find their happening. I can't refer to a non-licensed property manager in good faith.
Sure.
Yeah, but there is high demand, and I think we're really being also, and it sounds crazy because we're all small town living, but the commute to Revelstoke is the same as the city. Crazy, right? But they don't have avalanche risk. But 45-minute drive to work is common in most municipalities, as is the 25-minute drive. So we could be a bedroom community of those cities and what they are offering. So we have the opportunity to help with the accommodation there as well, which also helps drive our economic factor for development. So when developers are looking to build, they want to know how are they going to get a return? Are people going to live here? So I want to talk about the economic factors in Revelstoke and seminar, bolster the factor great students. Good. Yeah.
When you were in Revelstoke, you were property managing there or just real estate in the last like 5 years?
I was a property manager in Revelstoke. I did have a long-term license as well, and then I did some short-term rental management as well. And then I did some building and renovation and property services as well. When moving to St. Louis, 2017, I purchased, and I fully moved in 2019. I left all the property management behind and took on real estate trading.
And in do you have any when Revelstoke implemented their short-term rental bylaws, was that when you were still there?
Yes.
And how was there a positive impact on that? Did you see in the rental or in the rental pool? Did that change or what was the experience there?
I think that when we're looking at the availability of long-term rentals, and this is not the only impact that it's not on rental, we'll have to recognize that it definitely does feel out some of that, but our short-term rentals. And if you're an investor and you're looking at the annual return, you're paying for a manager 25% plus all the added costs. Sometimes short-term rental isn't as advantageous as long-term rental where you have steady revenue income. It depends property to property. When we're looking at providing more long-term housing, we also need to look at the fact we need to have jobs available for people to be able to qualify. We also need to make sure that when bylaws are introduced, that we're paying attention to the provincial regulation costs and governance. And unfortunately, a lot of what happened over COVID, they made laws that were impactful on landlords. For even for tenants, even if the tenant treated the property poorly and perhaps damaged it dramatically, we're not allowed to evict the tenant. And this hit landlords pretty hard. If you can imagine your retirement savings being put up in a property and you're paying between creditors and the tenant isn't paying their rent, you can't ask the tenant to leave. It puts fear and a lot of uncertainty into the long-term housing market and investment. But there's all these other factors that have happened in the last 5 years beyond just short-term rentals that I think we have to talk about and how to change that attitude towards being a landlord and what that looks like. And those provincial factors continue to impact us as well. They moderate the level of rental increases that you can have. So we have an increase of inflation at 6 or 7%. You know, the cost of utilities, the cost of contractors to repair and care, but you're only allowed to raise your rent by a fraction of what that is. So you are in fact subsidizing your investment here. So is it an investment or is it something else? And so having that conversation with future landlords, being able to give them confidence in this type of investment is what we need to lead towards. And short-term rentals is one part of it, but there's a lot of other things coming.
Agreed. That's a good point. Yes, Siobhan?
Through the chair, thanks for coming out. Do you think developers are interested in putting like fourplexes in that are going to just be for rentals, or do you see it more in our area where people are going to be putting in a secondary suite and that kind of thing? Well, 35% of our folks, I think it is, are this is their second home, and they're not like financially, they don't need a suite. So when we're trying to boost that, what do you think is an avenue to get more rental units?
I would be careful with the assumptions because the one that we made today will dramatically change the future. A lot of the people with the secondary homes here are reaching a point in their life where their children have moved on in a smaller place and are likely to sell in the next 5 years. So the groundwork that we place now will actually impact the buyers 5 years from now. And it's wonderful to put our vision forward like that. I think that if we do offer, when those properties turn over, the availability to have the garden suites or have somebody on a property that's going to cut the lawn and care for it, reduce the cost of the insurance, that will make purchasing the property better and it'll make it more advantageous for people to become landlords when they have a second home, just like you talked about. The cost of building, as we know, rose dramatically as well in the last 2 or 3 years. And having the ability to densify and offer fourplexes is another wonderful way of doing that and allowing to have tiered or garage house suites or what you want to call them. It's another way. I think that will definitely bring in more development and also increase densification in larger areas. You're not really having a lot more vehicles there, but you're having maybe 2 people versus.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any further questions or comments? Well, thank you, Jessica, very much for coming and speaking with us today and giving us your input on our housing needs and what your perspective from outside is. I appreciate having a realtor actually in the room. I think that they're one of the key stakeholders. The more developers or builders, realtors, because often you're the first call, somebody wanting to build in town or wanting to buy a lot, right? So I feel like your value in the room and in the conversation is very important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And have you back anytime.
Okay. Next, we have Carly from the DOSDC DevCorp. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Presentation was it? Here. No. And you know what, it was, I emailed it late, so if not, I have all the things. These are all your talking points. Okay, good. All right, so I can send everybody this as a follow-up. What I'm here to talk about today is the Development Corporation has established and determined 4 key priorities that are going to drive our direction over the next couple of years. We did this through the creation of a community strategic development plan. One of the pillars was housing. So we did recognize that, you know, with all of our work in terms of attraction and retention of businesses and development, part and parcel with that does come the housing challenges. And it's something that we really need to figure out how and what our role as a development corporation is within that priority. So I just had a quick few points on the overview. So we definitely recognize housing as a critical factor in sustainability and growth of the local economy. And as a development corporation, we are uniquely positioned to play an active role in residential development. Through that, through that we would work directly with the district of Sycamores and the planning department to determine where we have those avenues of land acquisition, surplus land use, etc. And we also can acquire and develop land independently or seek development partners to work with. With our board of directors, our 7-member board of directors, we do have quite a network within the housing development landscape, and we will be leveraging those relationships as we find out more about the needs and the direction that this housing committee would like to see us to go in. So some of the key points of our action plan are stimulate the development of residential lands by actively engaging with the developers, demonstrating the market demand. So I think everybody really understands where the demand is. It is stifling a bit our ability to attract businesses and even the ability to grow our existing business because of the lack of housing. This is something that we are seeing as a regional problem. You know, clearly it is something that's provincially and even nationally, but we're really seeing the stress of street talk when we heard Jessica talk about utilizing the avenues between Revelstoke all the way out through, you know, as far as North and South Shuswap, we are sharing the workforce. And through that, we need to figure out ways that we can house the people that we need to supplement more of the lower skilled jobs that are allowing our communities to thrive in our busy tourist season, but also filling those gaps within our shoulder seasons. We want to work to market vacant residential and commercial lands to potential developers and to increase the affordable housing inventory. So one of the ways that we're looking at doing that is developing modules within our existing website to showcase and have a central location point of all of the development opportunities that we can put out into our invest sites, into our networks, where we have those interested stakeholders and people that would want to come into Second and see this in a sort of a one-stop shop opportunity. We are looking actively to purchase land and work with experienced land developments to stimulate the housing development. So, you know, with conversations with our planning department and Sarah specifically is understanding really where those needs are and trying to pair the right lands with the right developers to potentially stimulate some growth. We've created through 4 partner stakeholders, Salmon Economic Development Society, Shuswap Economic Development Society, Community Futures, and the Silk Development Corporation. We've created the Shuswap Workforce Council. And within that, we have subcommittees. One of the subcommittees that I sit on is business retention and expansion. And through that, we have determined that we need to expand that into another subcommittee of housing. Because again, we have 3 or 4 different planning departments within our committee, access to those 3 different planning departments through our local areas. And we want to be able to more properly share best practices and initiatives that we're doing to see if there is something that we can look at from that regional perspective. So on June 14th, we have invited Sarah Martin from ours, planning department member from Salmon Arm, and then the CSRD will all come and sit within our Shuswap Workforce Council to address what each community is doing and figure out if we can elevate new plans in terms of addressing housing. One of the topics that does come up is land trust and ways to market potential land that is coming for development opportunities. And then obviously we want to ensure that we're, you know, whether it's myself or board director coming to sit within these committees to offer perspective or information and also understand where you guys as a housing committee see our role as a development corporation supporting your initiatives and directions that you want to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Malcolm?
Yeah, more of a comment, I guess. One of the models for housing is for developers is for seasonal workers is each business buys a door, like you pre-sell a unit. You build maybe a apartment, I call it a condo, I guess, strata or whatever. You might have 18 or 24 units in it or something like that. And say A&W buys a door, Moose Mulligan buys a door, 20 Acres buys a couple, and you pre-sell doors. And then that could generate revenue for some of the other units in that building to be below market value for affordable rent sort of thing. You think there's an appetite in our community to pursue something like that?
It's funny you say that. At our last meeting, we did talk about that. The challenge becomes what happens in those slowdown seasons and where that threshold is of when you become a long-term rental and become a landlord. And I think you nailed it. The laws right now are so in favor of the tenant that it does cause businesses to shy away if they're on the hook for, you know, if they get a land or a tenant, if they need a seasonal work 3 months of the year, let's say, and then they've got a long-term tenant per se in there and they can't evict them to, it's almost the reverse of where our short-term rental challenges are, where they don't really want to step into that role, and they've come to the development corporation asking us to, you know, find someone that would be willing to do it, where they could, you know, have first right of refusal for a door. So I think it's a bigger conversation, and we need to do some more research on that and see where when you impact those regulations or figure out how we fill that. One of the conversations we have been having with Revelstoke and Salmon Arm is there a way to offset those seasons? So Revelstoke is continually looking for their winter seasonal staff more so. Could we house them and figure out some type of layering in a transportation option to get them from Sycamoose to Revelstoke or Salmon Arm to Revelstoke, so that again, we can share that workforce and benefit each other without having to worry about those empty suites or empty units in those in a specific community's off season, because Revelstoke is not necessarily as busy as we are in the summer. Could we pull some of their winter workforce to supplement our gaps in jobs here? So I think it's a conversation we want to look at and potentially look at a pilot project even.
Now that you mentioned that, when I attended the housing summit there in Revelstoke, I did talk to their ECDev people. And we kind of tossed around the idea of buying land not so much midpoint, but Malaqua area where land costs are a little bit less. And Malcolm, if you recall, when we took that BC Nonprofit Housing Association course, Ready, Set, Build, we were tasked with creating a small satellite community on a land base, and it was multiple types of housing, but it was rental housing, it was workforce housing. It enabled so to purchase an acreage there and then share it and then have Revelstoke do a joint effort with our community, although we're closer to that, but I feel like it can create more attendance in school for it actually economically develops Malaqua or Area E, regardless of almost out of being sort of forced into it by a development, but sharing that, creating apartments, townhomes, family residences, but more in under the affordable umbrella that gives them, and then you have that commute where they're back and forth. And I think I'd like to, I think that would be a good idea for.
Yeah, and one of the other initiatives that we are looking at and we're looking to bring to our next meeting is, I don't know if anybody's heard of Happy Pad, but Happy Pad is a service that where they vet people essentially to go and it's like a affiliating service, I guess.
Right.
So you're looking at people that might be empty nesters that are looking maybe to rent out a room in their house, and they would connect with the Happy Pad people who have vetted employees that want to come and work within Sycamore, let's say, and then they would place them for 1, 2, 3, 4 month period. It's all determined, but it is something that is a professional service that you can engage with so that they can potentially post workers, generate a little bit of revenue without having to worry about, a short-term rental / a long-term rental. It's all part and parcel of this contract. So once it's something that other communities are using, where once we get someone to come and explain us exactly how that looks and where the liability lays from a landlord or hosting perspective, we'll be able to share those findings and see if that is a viable option.
Okay, that's a yes, Malcolm.
Yeah, I think in the model you just mentioned, the Residential Tenancy Act wouldn't apply because it's a shared accommodation. I've had firsthand experience in that in a negative way, but yeah, so if you're sharing a kitchen or something, it's considered a shared accommodation, then the Residential Tenancy Act wouldn't apply. So people might be more receptive to that because then they're not a landlord. 1 day's notice, the person has to leave and sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems from what I've seen from like looking at it from a 20,000 foot viewpoint, it does seem like a very advantageous program, especially when you were talking about business owners that are looking to house. You know what I mean? If we could get the business community behind the support of this model of Happy Pad, perhaps the community might be more receptive to opening up a bedroom if they can see that it's not just sort of a fly by night, some weird person is coming to stay in my house for, there's levels of security and vetting for the project or with this vision for it.
I wanted to support your introduction of the transit idea. Transit is one of the big things when it comes to for developers applying for affordable housing grants for rental only, not for sale. And that was one thing that we don't qualify for because we don't have transit. It's really checking a box on the application. But if we were to work out an agreement, it would also assist in developers that are looking to provide affordable rental housing as well, just as a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's because we did identify that as a barrier for people to even just come from Malaqua to get into Sycamore to work, is there are some people that just don't want to drive, can't drive for whatever reason, and we're missing a significant amount of unskilled labor that we could be tapping into in other communities. Typically unskilled labor are the ones that don't have that transportation ability, so.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Is there a classification of, say, for instance, a building that is just for employee housing, you know, like rooms and a shared kitchen, you know, shared bathrooms, showers, those kind of things? But I'm talking about the BC Tenancy Act. Does like a center like that or a housing like that on a land that you would rent those spaces? Does it need to follow the Tenancy Act?
I actually don't know. That's
Okay.
a good question to you.
If they're shared communal spaces such as the kitchen, like Malcolm said, then it falls under a lodging agreement.
Okay.
Lodging agreement can be drafted independently of a tenancy or a short-term agreement, and often encompasses the shared uses of different things. Where this comes into the liability factors when you're insuring the premise and for the risks associated with it and whose content is insured. So those things have to be covered. But it's as long as there's a shared kitchen or shared laundry and that type of thing, it usually 99% of the time doesn't fall under a tenancy.
So is this something that you guys have discussed as far as just like an employee housing instead of you know, places that they would rent and trying to fill those for the year? Then the issue with Revelstoke possibly using those in the winter, Sycamoose in the summer, you know,
It's
that kind of land use.
Yeah, we talked about using the nest here in Sycamoose as a bit of a case study to see what it looks like. And you look at, yes, if there's a long-term tenant essentially with the Eagles, but could we utilize something like that in the summer? It's the right model. We haven't explored very much, but definitely it is something to look at. Again, if you didn't have that anchor tenant in the winter, what happens with it? Because it isn't necessarily attractive accommodations for our winter tourism, which would be, you know, sledders and stuff like that.
No,
That's
just
dorm stuff.
strictly for
Yeah,
people that are employed, you know, in these seasonal jobs, basically,
Yeah.
they would have to. Because
I think it would work. I would love to explore more about the nest and its, you know, the revenue it's generating in the summertime versus could we do, as Malcolm had suggested, allow a room for business that wanted to apply to house staff in it? Could be a quick win. I don't know. It's speaking out of turn, but it seems like a
Could be a good pilot project.
good opportunity.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Carly, for coming to present and share your ideas.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one left. Best of the last, Matt.
Oh, I don't know.
Matt, is it Ganger?
I'm just a singer.
Oh, Matt.
That
Ganger.
singer.
Matt Ganger with MRG Design.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm Matt Ginger with MRG Design. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just a very quick history. Born and raised in Salmon Arm, college in Kamloops, took engineering, design, and drafting technology. After that, designed trusses and floor systems in Vernon. And then, long story short, I started my design company in 2005, and then been designing kind of full-time, some part-time in there as well. Throughout the years, had a construction company for about 5 or 6 years, I believe. Some building here in Salmon Arm, southern Alberta and Saskatchewan, actually. And then more recently, just over 2 years at the city of Salmon Arm in the engineering department, and then decided to go back to full-time design about a year and a half ago. So I'm here to learn as much so that I'm to answer any questions. I don't necessarily have a formal presentation. I talked to Sarah a little bit about this. Obviously, you know, in the last few, it's tough to say a timeline, but definitely we're seeing more an increase in detached suites and even attached suites. Just with the housing prices being where they are, people are looking for secondary income. with their house. So I've done a lot of custom designs that would be somewhat similar to this. This is one of my stock designs that you see, which is a very simple, very low cost carriage house with some garage space underneath and a 1-bedroom suite up above. That's, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Also, I might have some questions for you too.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? Yes, Malcolm?
When you sell this to us, and how much does that cost?
I can, we can talk about it. Like I'm happy if there's a possibility of us working together in the future, I'm happy to explore that. I'd love to work with you guys. If it doesn't fit, no worries at all.
Well, I think Sycamoose is an untapped market because the main subdivision, we call the tree streets because, pine, spruce, cottonwood,
Right.
whatever. They were designed for septic fields.
Right.
And on the average, I think they're 0.23 of an acre each lot. So they're just begging for infill. And something like this would be perfect. We do have initiatives to go out for an expression of interest to get designers to bring something like this forward to shortlist for some houses that we could use for people come to the front desk and saying, I want one of those. I'm going to stick it in my backyard.
Sure.
Have to make sure the setbacks are good and the rest is already approved for construction.
Right, and forgive me, most of my knowledge is kind of salmon arm to Vernon and into Blind Bay, so I don't actually know Sorrento that well. But are like most of the kind of the older lots in town, are they like what size would they be? They're significant enough that you could put something like this?
I think Jessica would know better, right?
About 0.23 of an acre.
Okay.
And currently we have a build to 40% of the lot size.
Okay.
And your typical home is about 1,000 to 1,200 square feet footprint. So
Okay.
it does allow for perhaps the structure to be about 24 by 40,
Okay.
even as large as that, as long as there's no other outbuildings that have already been secured. Am I right? Get that right? Awesome.
And there's some.
And I just talk about this every week. And I think the big question is this, you have a great opportunity here, and we all do. If we developed a cost per square foot under a couple different models, we could easily get this ball rolling and get some builders involved too. That I think it would work out really well.
Our bylaw is already in place and allows for 4 units per lot.
Right, okay.
Hang on, I got some eyebrows there.
No,
Proposed, Malcolm. It's proposed.
Proposed. Okay.
We'll get a
Two
recommendation.
definitely,
We need to take.
Pardon me?
two definitely.
Okay.
Indoors for.
Okay.
You
Stand
were
corrected.
there, weren't you?
Apologies.
This is the perfect thing, because I get asked this all the time. If you have in the tree street, right, great opportunity there, I happen to also live in the tree street. It's already got, some of the by-levels have 2 suites in them already, right, from like a while back. If someone wanted to do one of these, what do they have to do to get there?
Through the chair.
Yes.
So they would currently, at the moment, they would need a zoning amendment. But we do have for discussion a little later in this meeting, an adapted base R1 zone for our low density residential neighborhoods where we contemplate increasing the number of accessory dwellings. So you could do that. Like as of right, it would be easy. You just apply for this. If say we bought this, get a permit, potentially get some tax and DCC breaks. We're talking about that later today as well. And just move forward with a building permit. So technically that kind of density, you would normally need a development permit first, but we're talking about waiving that requirement, writing in an exemption where you use a pre-approved stock plan. It's been approved by the district council in terms of the moment here. Yeah.
And what would the timeline be? Because that's the other question I get. Time and money.
It takes like a week for our building inspector to turn around permits. So if everything's in place, which is the idea of having stock plans,
Amazing.
they would just need to draw up a site plan to confirm setbacks and parking, and they can have a building permit in a week, potentially.
So one question for you guys with, with step code 3 coming in place May 1st, every house needs an energy advisor to take a look at the assessment. So would you as city of Secundus include an energy assessment with that package if you were to have something that was kind of pre-approved?
That's actually an excellent consideration that he should include for sure. Scott, have any thoughts on this? He knows a little more about code, working with the building inspector more closely.
I think it would make sense if we had a stock plan, you'd make sure that it meets that, an energy advisor had approved the plan.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's literally turnkey, ready to go.
Yes, Malcolm?
Yeah, so on the agenda later, we are talking about infill and changing some bylaws and stuff to incorporate that, to recommend to council, the committee to recommend to council. But Councillor Rich and myself are at the housing summit in Vancouver.
Okay.
That last weekend?
Last week,
Last week.
Monday to
Yeah.
Thursday.
Well, busy. And the premier was there and the minister of housing, and they're rolling out what they call housing people, I think it's called. And that won't come in effect until the fall, but what they're proposing is each lot that's can have 4 units is allowed 4 units. So what we'll be discussing later today is the provincial government's going to implement provincially later this fall as for infill. So we're just trying to be a little proactive and get it going ahead of time.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Matt. Appreciate you coming out today, presenting. Thank you. Okay. Moving along, then we've got the implementation update of the zoning bylaw. Sarah, take it away.
Through the chair, thank you very much. So I'm going to minimize the screen here. So coming back to our short-term actions in our housing strategy. So as far as implementation update, these are, some key things that we want to look at. Trying to get this thing moved. It's not going to move for me. So these are our short-term actions from the housing strategy. Here, screen in case we need to come back and look at any of them. Just a moment. There we go. So implementation update. So here's kind of where we already are. And here's the items from our short-term actions that we're currently going to be talking about today. So we've kind of got one already checked off, which was implement regulation and monitoring of the short-term rental industry. So that happened in January, and staff are working with folks on business licensing. And we do have a couple temporary use permits coming forward to council in May, I believe, for consideration for short-term rentals in a couple of our neighborhood areas. So these are the other items, and I'll go through these as we go along. So the R1 zone proposed amendments. So I attached that draft zone to your package. It's pretty much the same as our existing zone with a few little changes. So the section of that zone, refined it a little bit for clarity around our principal uses, which is a single family dwelling or a 2-unit dwelling. So 2-unit dwelling is a fancy way of saying duplex. And we've upped our overall density to 4 dwellings total. So what that would mean is if you have one principal dwelling unit, your main single family dwelling, you could then have 3 secondary dwelling units. And our zone already allows a variety of formats. So they could be part of the house, kind of a little more hidden. It can be a garden suite. It could be part of your garage or accessory building, shop, whatever that accessory building is. If you have a duplex, then you could have 2 secondary suites. So each duplex could have its own secondary dwelling, whether that's within the building like that one on Capel, the council approved last year, or their coach houses or garden suites, whatever kind of works best for the property. The other place that it was changed, we had changes was in the regulations and conditions of use, which is kind of the last section of each zone. And there's some very specific regulations there, just that a lot of times they're general regulations, but anyway, in this case, it was more specific. We had a restriction there that restricted duplexes from having secondary dwellings. So removed that. So in summary, the base zone is largely unchanged. The proposed density is in line with provincial considerations, which Councillor McCabe just gave us a little mini update on. It sounds like it's coming in the fall, hopefully. So as I go through these implementation updates, I do have a little post-it on the side of each one of these that kind of shows our different strategies and actions from our housing strategy that this item is checking off. So if you want me to read them, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll continue carrying on.
Just, I'm saying continue carrying on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Through the chair, if there's any questions before I move on to our next implementation update.
Just one thing I forgot to mention at the housing summit or symposium, whatever it's called, also legalizing basement suites. Just a blanket legalization of basement suites. And each community is slightly different, like in Sycamus, some of our basement suites are in floodplains, so it's not allowed, but wherever it's allowable, it's going to be a blanket sweep across the problem, legalizing suites, basement suites.
Good information. Okay. Okay. Onto this draft zone, from what I understand, because it's part of our zoning bylaw, it will need to be considered by the Planning and Development Committee as well for recommendations, and then move it forward to council. Scott, do you have any comments around that, how that process might look?
No, I think it could just be the regular zoning process. So yeah, include the Planning and Development Committee.
Okay, so I think because the housing committee has already given a recommendation to implement the strategy and council supported that we don't need a recommendation from the committee necessarily to move forward, but it's good for comments if there's anything you think is 4 too high, that kind of thing.
I personally think that's okay. 4 is, I don't think 4 is too high because I think it's based on, if it's based on lot size, which I believe it is. I'm not sure which one I'm looking, who I should look to. Okay, Sarah. If it's based on lot size, then that makes sense. And I think if it's a smaller lot, if there's a compromise and it's only 3, then make it 3. But let's maximize our land as best we can.
Yeah.
Yes, Sean?
Oh, sorry, through the chair. And I mean, the other part we need to look at is if our infrastructure can hold it. Obviously, our water system can. But we're also looking at what our sewer system is going to look like in 10 years if we continue, like how quickly we infill, and that we are going to need to put upgrades there. So that is something as we bring people in, our roads, parking, schools, recreation, it isn't just about building houses. We need to make sure we have an infrastructure base set in the community and a plan that we're looking 10 years ahead. That, you know, our elementary school right now is at 204 students and it holds 230. The high school has lots of room. Malacqua School is not viable. It'll never open again. So absolutely, we need to grow our communities, but we also need to have our support from our provincial and federal government to have that infrastructure and to, you know, be able to support that if someone moves here, that they can get their kid into school. They're not driving to Canoe to put their kid to school, right? So excellent. I think that's, you know, and that our systems can support them.
Yeah, excellent point. We will end up, that's a segue into our later topics really well. Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, I think the language is up to 4 dwellings. It's not mandatory to have 4 dwellings, just up to 4 dwellings. And of course, subject to square footage and what Jessica was saying earlier about, you know, what size of structure is there, and then, you know, percentage of square footage for the remainder of the lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are some existing bylaws that still have to conform to that, but if you can, then you could put up to 4 dwellings.
Any comments?
No, I.
Okay, right.
Same thing, infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the zone works,
Hmm.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, just one comment about the infrastructure. I'm not sure if like subdivision and development bylaw, if like, I'm sure there's exceptions for upgrading infrastructure in single family dwellings. Question would be, is if you allowed up to 4 dwellings, would you still extend that extension?
Good question.
So we're not currently asking for separate connections for secondary dwellings
Right.
at the moment. Right? So perhaps that's something we would look at just to see if we need additional connections depending on, right, because of the size of the service. But we are looking at things like development cost charges and reductions in certain instances. Like, so where someone's committing to those particular units for say a period of 5 years, it's going to be for workers or for seniors or right. Or they're committing to a unit being designed and built as an adaptable unit. So we've got some specific goals we want to hit. So yeah, when it comes to servicing, we'll need to ask more about that around separate connections.
Well, separate connections, I think typically one connection per lot is fairly typical. But a lot of times subdivision development bylaws will require if they be more than kind of one dwelling with and then with a second suite or whatever, they'll be required, like as soon as you go to say there are 3 units, they would be required to like upgrade the main if it was undersized. So not just their connection, but also the main and any services downstream as well.
Yeah, we did check in with our engineering technologists first when we broached this gentle infill policy. And you know, where it's kind of scattered throughout the neighborhood, which would be anticipated, especially at first, there shouldn't be any issues in our main neighborhoods. And we weren't planning on extending this, say, into our hillside neighborhoods because there are servicing issues there. But yeah, when it comes to subdivision development servicing, we have an existing bylaw, we have a draft one that I don't think it's going to be ready to move forward soon. And yeah, I think it's something we'll look at for sure. Thank you for raising that. But in terms of the zone itself, it'll allow a maximum density of 4. There's of course going to be site constraints, right? You still need to meet setbacks. You still need to meet parcel coverage. So what it would probably happen is you would see conversions of existing portions of houses or new houses where it's within the unit because of parcel coverage and setbacks, right? Like they need to fit, right? Same footprint. So the zone does allow people to subdivide parcels, at least in half, most of them. So you would probably start seeing houses instead of running across the front of the property, they'll run down the property. And you'll start seeing units that are kind of tucked in as part of an existing building and like down the side in the back as part of, say, a coach house or something like that. If someone were to subdivide, but a full size lot, I don't see there being an issue with there being 4. I don't see them being all 4 separate buildings. No. It would probably be incorporated into.
So tying into a current home.
Yeah.
Doing an addition to that as opposed to a separate standalone building in the garage and having the second, you could do 2 secondary suites above. That might be the most cost effective and moving forward, like you're saying on design too, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Care of one house.
Structurally, it needs to be said.
It has 2 basement suites and 1 coach house.
Okay.
And it fits and it looks good and it doesn't feel weird.
Yes, Tia?
Sure. Parking. Yeah, with 4, is there an issue though with parking?
Not that I'm seeing so far. Like I say, there are some illegal ones around town that I noticed. And they're doing a pretty good job of accommodating the parking.
Yeah.
So, and there are some recommendations within our housing strategy to kind of look at those. And in terms of, we need to do a master transportation plan, looking at road diets in terms of maybe some of the roads through our main neighborhood become one way, and we dedicate some land that would be for on-street parking potentially for, say, 4plexes or row houses. But we'll see. That's part of a later project. Right now, we're just talking about secondary suites.
Okay, so if somebody comes in with an application and do they need to provide on their drawings then that they've got enough parking to if this secondary suite has two sleeping units in it, is there enough park? Do they have to provide and show on their drawings that they've got enough parking for,
Yes.
you know, because a full home could be 3 or 4 cars, like, yeah,
Yes.
and that, okay.
Yes.
That's good. That's good. Okay, if that's, let's continue then.
Parking underneath.
And that design.
In that design.
Yeah.
Yes.
Through the chair too, the other thing that they, well, they said many things that they can mention, but the BC government, Ravi, who's housing, BC Housing, is saying, minister, there could be grants up to $50,000 for secondary suites. So that again is a fall promise. But when people want to convert, that the BC government is promising to put some kind of granting process in to help people convert. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think also there was a federal program for construction loans at really cheap rates too. On top of that, you could stack it.
Yeah.
There's also communities that are doing it, you know, districts that are doing the same as well throughout BC. Different districts are even giving incentives that way for loans or money or grants.
Okay. Okay.
So if we're ready, we'll move on to our next
Move on to the next one.
Proposed. So the housing strategy, it's not speaking to any of the other work that the planning department has been doing. So, okay, try to stay focused on this. So there's a few like key sections of our existing official community plan that I can see us going in and doing a little bit of tidying up. We could do a heck of a lot more, but let's keep it. If we go in tight with a focus on supporting our infill program specifically at this time, I think we can get in there and get this done. So there is, of course, an amendment process. So it's a longer process with public hearings and consultation, et cetera. But this is what I've identified so far, where we could do some changes. So section 2.4, universal design principles and diversity, looking at kind of aligning that language and updating it to reflect what's proposed with the housing incentive bylaw. And we'll talk about that topic next. So that bylaw talks about looking at the BC Building Code's adaptable housing standards. So section 3.2, low density residential land use designation, rework the housing types that are supported a little bit, rework parking and incentives.
So
Wait,
we're waiting.
wait.
So, and my specific thoughts with parking was, we've got a clause in a different land use designation that says that the district will support variances or reduce parking requirements for affordable housing. Let's bring that into our low density land use designation as well. Remove a siting requirement for secondary dwellings. So currently the official community plan wants to see all secondary dwellings in the rear yard. I've seen lots of examples locally where it's actually in the front yard and you barely even notice it. There's one on Larch Ave by the park. You might not have noticed it because it is so well done. So our medium density residential land use designation would look at sort of tweaking the language a bit to speak a little bit more to infill. It currently speaks mostly to new development that's greenfield development, so blank land, as opposed to lands that's already have houses. So looking at sort of language there around subdivision servicing and access. So speak to purpose-built rentals, attainable and adaptable dwellings, and zoning for tenure. So these are all terms that we've included in our housing strategy that aren't terms contemplated necessarily in the official community plan. So just trying to align language and terms. And include density targets in this zone. So, and not just density targets, but for housing types as well. Because you'll see later, I'll show you, and we already know we're missing a lot of housing types. but we really need to kind of boost that and really kind of direct our growth. So including targets would be a good idea. So 3.6, our multifamily development permit area. So we've just got this one development permit area that's meant to blanket apply to everything. And this would technically apply to some of our infill. So there's an exemption for under 3 dwelling units, but as soon as you hit 4, then you're triggering a development permit process. So what I would propose is implementing a minor development permit process, which would then tie into a separate bylaw that will allow for delegated authority so that these minor type of applications wouldn't need to be approved by council in order to fast track their approval. So if we're just talking about adding a 4th dwelling unit, a 4th secondary dwelling, allowing an officer of the district to approve the permit. A lot of places already do this for other types of permits, but doing it for this as well. So this other separate bylaw would contemplate how that would look, FYI. Minimize landscaping requirements. So it's currently looking for a lot of perimeter landscaping. And that type of thing where, and I know the province, when they were looking at it, they were looking at kind of removing these sort of abilities of local governments to require these types of things as far as form and character goes, to try to make these kinds of applications go faster, where you don't need to have considerations for landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. So in lieu of that, put in some support, and this is elsewhere in the OCP. So it's not out of line with what we've already got in there. We'll just be moving it into this as well. Support contributions to neighborhood parks and greenways in lieu of providing private open space. So move that space into the public realm, and it would be provided nearby locally in your neighborhood as opposed to on the property. It's talking about like a barbecue pit or like a play structure or bench area, that type of thing that might be typically required in a multifamily development. And then the next recommendation would be around our Schedule A land use designations. So I know that when we've talked about this in our past meetings, when we were preparing the strategy, there was a lot of support from the committee to let's just do this and not take baby steps. So if the committee is on board, we would look at taking this purple land use designation, which is our medium density land use designation, and expanding it into our pre-serviced level neighborhoods that are currently low density. So all this kind of pale beige, that's our low density area. So looking at just moving that over in there. And then what that would do would enable people to apply for a zoning amendment. Though I do have some ideas for our next meeting where we could do some pre-zoning. It would make it easier for a zoning amendment to do something like, say, a 4-plex or a triplex. So those are units that are all principal dwelling units. They're not secondary dwelling units. They're all equally sized and they can be under separate ownership. One wouldn't need to go through this longer OCP amendment and zoning amendment process. It would make it a little easier. And when land is being sold, it would give, purchasers some confidence because it's like already supported by the official community plan to do row housing or a small apartment building or 4-plex, triplex, 4-plex.
I like that idea.
I do too. Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. Victoria was saying that 6 is the magic number to make money. So is that something we should be at? Like, I don't know if our lot size, but they're saying for investors, and I was speaking to the mayor of Victoria, she sat with us for a bit, and how they got that golden number, but it would be maybe interesting to see why 6 is the golden number.
Yeah, I'll see if I can dig it up and send it around. I was at a PIBC, sort of Planning Institute webinar around missing middle, and a lot of their presenters brought tables showing the breakdown of cost of investment and where that break was, and it is 5 to 6 in terms of making that cost effective and making that happen. So I can. Yeah, I just think maybe it's something we need to look at, because if we're trying to attract developers, and especially for rental housing, it's got to be profitable for them, right? So I mean, we could certainly look at that, like a medium density land use designation would support up to 6 for sure.
Right.
Right? So high density, our current designation is in the town center and just abutting it. So
Yeah.
basically Finlayson, Main Street and Riverside Ave. High density, so
Yeah.
that would be obviously way more than that. So I think that zone, those zones, I think it's 120 units per hectare currently.
Right.
So that's high density.
And 6-story, right?
Up to, yeah. Yeah, so we'd be talking about a medium density would be up to 3.
Yes.
Smaller apartment buildings, townhouses, row houses. So that's already specified in our OCP. So,
And that's part of the strategy, that suggestion of the 3 lots, say in the, development area, 3 lots, but we would allow 5 to 6 row houses on those 3 lots so that the developer can.
we're not necessarily pre-zoning at this point.
No,
Yeah,
but it falls under that same sort of idea or concept that we had talked about.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
so
Malcolm, did you have another comment you wanted?
No, I'm
No, you're
no,
good?
that's
Okay.
answered, yeah.
All right. Okay.
Did Jessica have something?
You're kind of not, but,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say we've got a full agenda, so if you want to mark them down though, we'll go through our agenda and then I'll open and you can we'll give you a few minutes to kind of make some comments. Does that make sense? We'll just, because I know we're full. We've got a big busy day. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, all right.
makes sense.
Okay,
Okay.
that's all right.
Basically, as we go over all these updates, you're like, yep. Okay, so Sarah's gonna write a staff report and take this to council/PDC.
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent.
Can't guarantee when,
Yeah.
That's what-
but it's
Yes.
there for this year. Okay.
Okay,
So our next implementation update topics. The proposed housing incentive bylaw. So this actually came out of speaking with Jessica's buyers. And they actually, so as a housing committee, we were already talking about looking at development cost charges and revitalization in terms of providing incentives. And these people pointed out was, they had been working in Quesnel and had built a rental housing project there, and they were interested in doing one here too, but there's all these secrecy things until things are public, right? So I can't really talk about it. It sounds like it's going well, so we may have something coming. But what they said is they really enjoyed working with Quesnel. And they loved their DCCs and revitalization tax bylaw. So I went and had a look. And it's pretty cool. So what I've done is tailored something that aligns with our housing strategy that's more specific to Sycamoose. And how it would function and how it functions in Quesnel is as a companion bylaw that acts on their existing development cost charge bylaw and their existing revitalization tax exemption bylaw. So, and what that does is it means that we don't need to get, say, the inspector of municipalities to approve this bylaw before council can consider it and adopt it. In this case, so long as it's not imposing development cost charges, as long as it's waiving or reducing them, this is something the district can do.
Okay.
So the other piece that I really liked about what Quesnel did is they built in the BC Building Code's adaptable housing standards. And I thought this was fantastic because it's a great way to address what we've been talking about in terms of creating accessible housing options for seniors to age in place before transitioning into supportive housing. It seemed like a really great way to do it. And it's I can't remember the word, but it's like a very clean, like this is what you do. It's all laid out, very clean. This is how you meet this, right? So I thought that was fantastic. And that was one of their criteria in terms of meeting the conditions to receive these incentives that were offered by this bylaw. So what was attached to the agenda was, I gave you a pager. And this is what we're currently kind of looking at. This still needs to be reviewed by our finance department and be circulated. I'll have our building inspector look at it as well in terms of looking at accurate construction costs and getting accurate numbers. Sorry, just sharing this with someone in the gallery. So here's kind of what drafted up for seniors housing so far. So a minimum construction value of 300,000. That's like one new dwelling unit right now, but we'd be looking, this would be multifamily. So it would be pretty easy for someone like, say, the Eagle Valley Seniors Housing Society to qualify for this. So minimum construction value. The term length, as far as the tax reduction part, taxes on the property, would be 10 years, which is consistent with what our other existing bylaws. And the tax exemption would be 100% for seniors housing. So they're like a big component of our population. The DCC reduction for development cost charges. If it's a nonprofit organization such as the Eagle Valley Seniors Housing Society, it would be 100% development cost charge reduction. If it's not, then there's these other alternatives where a proponent would be willing to meet these other conditions. So if they're willing to do purpose-built rental unit, so say they've got 5 that are purposely there for rent as opposed to sale. So say someone wants to do a development that will be geared towards seniors and they're going to sell most of the units. But if they're proposing to do a portion of them that would be for rental specifically, then they would qualify for 50% development cost charge reduction on those units, just those units. And there's an additional stackable incentive or alternative where it's an attainable dwelling unit. So they would sell it to someone at this attainable, it would have to meet our definition of attainable. Or it could be a rental unit that's an attainable rental unit. I hope this makes sense.
We'll let her finish, then we'll ask.
Okay, so then when we've got sort of 4 housing types that we're trying to incentivize here. So purpose-built rentals. We've got a similar construction value in here, or renovation. Say you're renovating a building, say it's a building of rental units or just one dwelling unit, minimum value of 300,000. And that could be tweaked if we think that that doesn't make sense for a renovation of, say, a single dwelling unit. I feel like it makes sense for a multifamily, like an apartment building. But you can look at that. Term length 10 years again, tax exemption 100% for purpose-built rentals. And then development cost charges is, again, if it's a nonprofit, it's waived anyway, we can't charge it. 30% for an adaptable dwelling unit and 20% for an attainable dwelling unit. If we're talking about a renovation or new construction of, say, a secondary dwelling unit, the minimum value then would be 10,000 for a renovation or construction. And I think as a renovation, that makes sense. Construction, you're probably going to be far more than 10,000. And for 5 years for a secondary dwelling unit. And the idea behind the 5-year instead of the 10-year is that I think it's a little more attractive to people who might want to do a bed and breakfast ultimately. But this would be, it has to be a rental unit for someone's home for at least 5 years for you to meet this, right? And then for development cost charges, a 50% stackable reduction. So it's a purpose-built rental unit, you get 50% off. If you are making it attainable, so you're going to charge a below market rent, or it's going to be accessible. So roll-in shower, for example, then you would meet that as well. And so I think that adds up. I'd have to do the math. I think it was around 80% potentially. So again, we need to run this by finance and make sure this all kind of makes fiscal sense. Okay. Or does it matter? We might decide it doesn't matter because ultimately this bylaw, you can only do these companion bylaws for a period of 4 years because there is no approval by the inspector. This is how the legislation is written. It can only be for 4 years, but it aligns with our cycle for doing our housing needs assessment anyway, which means that we can review and update it as we do our housing needs assessments. Okay, so the next 2 are adaptable dwelling units and attainable dwelling units. Similar kind of thing. So for adaptable dwelling unit, both of these are a 5-year term length for taxes, property taxes. And for the DCC reduction for adaptable 30%, because I think it's a little more important to our community with seniors, and for attainable dwelling 20%. But again, maybe we don't care. Maybe we just waive it across the board. Up to you guys. So the other component, aside from this 4-year cycle, we can also set a maximum investment value. So we would look at kind of a maximum construction value coming through the door. And we'll need to tie this to housing targets to get a better understanding of what this number should be. But once we've hit this maximum construction value number that have come through the door that have qualified for these incentives, the bylaw would then terminate, it would end, and those would no longer be applicable. So, and that would say that it's being very successful. We've now met a housing target ahead of a 4-year deadline. And now it's terminated. And so then the district isn't losing money in terms of, because we need development cost charges to upgrade our infrastructure, right? For roads, sewer, water, parks. That's what development cost charges are for.
So my question is, so this is municipally.
Exactly.
So what is the province, and you guys can attest to that if you went to this summit, what is the province? What incentive is the province doing to kind of, can they layer that with anything from the province? Like if you're talking a $50,000 grant, do you know what that?
The only thing at the summit was mentioned at the federal level was a big push to waive the GST.
Okay,
But no guarantees of
No,
that.
no
yet.
guarantees, yeah. The feds didn't say they're going to do it. It was just
okay.
everybody in the room saying they should.
Well, that would be good because I think a historical document that I shared with everybody, the history of long-term tenancy agreement, that was one of the things that drove developers away from building purpose-built rental units. And they went to the strata and condo model back in the early 80s. And that was kind of the cause of that. And I think it solved the problem.
It solved that immediate.
It solved the immediate problem and it solved it more in the major centers like Vancouver, which was where the problem was. And now we've got the full rollout of that. But I think this is good. This is exciting to see. I like this.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
One of the things Prince George talked about this, they went to 0 DCCs to attract builders and build their economy very quickly, and it worked. They've had a massive boom. They're still not keeping up to where they need to be. But what the other thing that happened though was that like they were losing, it's a much bigger city than us, obviously, but millions and millions of dollars. And then again, not being able to keep up with their infrastructure. And so they were talking about pulling it back, but their concern is as soon as they pull it back, the builders will go somewhere else. And they've had a lot of influx of people move to town to work building, and they're going to lose a lot of families. So they're kind of, it seemed like a really great idea. Like I like the staggered. So we're not kind of giving away everything. But they said it actually, you know, they thought they were doing this wonderful thing and it's caught up with them and they've kind of got themselves in some trouble, that they didn't foresee. So that was interesting.
Well, and I think that's a great comment. And again, it kind of ties into one of the things that I want to share with you later when we get to seminar updates. In terms of making sure that where we put this medium density land use designation, it's tied to where we have existing infrastructure that's capable of supporting it. So we don't kind of get into that issue. And then also the Housing Accelerator Fund, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. There's an opportunity to recoup some of that. So like, because I think like the federal government is recognizing that kind of issue where, yeah.
And yes.
My one concern, I guess, would be is that in 5 years, that these units will then again be where we're at prior to the short-term rental. They'll all turn into short-term rentals.
The idea is that they would still support homeownership. So in a residential area, the intent is not that both units are short-term rentals or all units are short-term rentals. So that new R1 zone, for example, it only allows you to have one sleeping unit. So only one of those dwelling units could be used as a bed and breakfast. The owner has to.
Which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying that, you know, that could be where, you know.
I hear you.
For the future as 5 years comes rolling around and it's like anything, you know, people are looking to make more money and.
Well, we do need to do a new housing needs assessment at 5 years, right? So we'll be able to step back, have a look, how well did we do, assess how well these strategies worked. and regroup and go from there, address whatever issues come up.
Okay, Malcolm?
Yeah, for anybody to qualify for any incentives or in the incentive package, wouldn't we want to sign them into a housing agreement? And so could that housing agreement extend past the 5-year exemption for taxes, say, or exemption for DCCs or taxes per se? So if you got 100% exemption for seniors over 10, well, that's a good example, 10. If you got a 5-year exemption, could a housing agreement still force the owner to make that unit available for rental past the incentive period?
It could be a disincentive, right? So at this point, we just want to get the units built.
Then what
And there's
they would,
other things that need to get caught up, right? Like we have a lot of interest in building hotels, so purpose tourism accommodations. So we'll kind of have to see how that works, but the draft bylaw that goes along with these, so I didn't give you the draft bylaw because it's just a bunch of gobbledygook, really.
will they,
Definitions and conditions included, in some cases, you might need a housing agreement, yes.
Right.
It would be part of it.
before they get incentives?
Potentially, yes. So in terms of, conditions of using the plan library, for example, but there is an agreement you have to enter into as part of the tax exemption. There's an agreement you have to enter into for that. And I need to understand it a little more. That may take the place of needing to do a housing agreement as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really important that we think about that 4-year end, that 5-year end. I think that's key because having that cited, we need a 5-year plan, we need a 10-year plan, and we need to be thinking about 15 years down the road. We got to be planning for, and I think the better job we do now and with this current council, like you guys have a big
And maybe it's more of a
job.
percentage over a longer period of time.
Right.
Maybe a 10-year, because 5 years is going to fly by.
Well,
And maybe it's a percentage of,
Maybe you start with a larger
Yes.
percentage and
Right.
then gradually go down into a.
Our current bylaw works that way, but it might be a little too complicated. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like wanting something that's super easy for housing proponents to understand, I think is the most important thing in terms of attracting them here.
Right.
So like, I agree with you. And that's initially where I came into this, was looking at this stepped strategy. But I think it overcomplicates things and it just needs to be really simple to understand. And I think the beauty of it is that it has cutoffs.
target.
Which is an incentive as well.
Yeah.
that question, you said somebody had done this. Has this worked in another municipality, Quesnel?
Quesnel uses it specifically for multifamily housing only.
Okay, and when did they start using it?
I think it was 20.
How long? 2018? So they're beyond their 4 years. And what was the results of that? It would be nice to know what the outcome of that was, because they're now in year 5. And how did that roll out? Because if we can learn anything from their experience now.
Prince George had massive success.
Prince George they said it was absolutely incredible. I mean, the other thing too, though, is Quesnel is we don't benchmark against them because they're supplying working houses where short-term rentals for us is, we have a lot of them now and they will continue to grow and they're not a bad thing, but we do have to manage it because what our rental, what are we at, 9%? I think that
For
long-term rentals and sickness is
For
9%,
people who rent here, as of 2021, we took a huge hit.
which is crazy low.
Lost a lot of rental units.
And so, we have to, Victoria's 60%, I think Prince George was like 45%. So we're really low for rentals. And we lost 10 families this year out of our elementary school because people couldn't find rentals.
Yeah.
Where we've lost kids
Yeah, that's not
and people that work and buy groceries and,
right.
scooters or whatever, so. Come and buy it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, any more comments on this right now? No? Okay.
Okay, So our last update topic is the plan library, which was a very popular and hot topic early on in the housing committees. So recently the RDNO rolled out a contest to do this. So we were already talking about doing it, and the RDNO, they rolled out a contest. Submissions closed March, at the end of March, and they're now reviewing. So I had a look at it. I mean, Kelowna, this was what was talked about in our early meetings, was the Kelowna model. Nelson has since done it specifically for accessory dwellings for laneway houses is what they did. We don't have laneways, so not really contemplating it in that context. And so how their programs worked was, it was a contest where people had to submit their designs. They didn't have to be construction drawing sets, but they were still required to, you know, put in a significant amount of time in preparing these drawings, measurements, floor areas, proving out their cost effectiveness, their energy efficiency. And they were offering cash prizes. So in a lot of cases, they were able to secure funding from elsewhere, or they were cooperating with other communities. And so they had a significant amount of money to offer for prizes. And then they would purchase the plans outright, and they would offer $1,000 royalty for every time they were used. And the reality is the district just does not have that kind of budget for something like that. So we did draft an EOI because there was interest in it, and it was more, not a contest, just more of a call for proposals. Like, what can you give us? That was structured similarly. And I did talk to Paul Beecher of Beecher Architecture, and I talked to Matt. It's not a very attractive. It's really not. So I put together some pros and cons here. So pros, it's a known format in the region. So, you know, designers, architects in the area have probably come across these contests over the last few years already, and have in fact submitted. As Matt mentioned, he did submit to the RDNO. It can raise the profile of our housing strategy dramatically, because we'd be doing all this like, oh, contest, join us, like, so people become aware of it, and there's potentially more investment because of it. It can generate multiple options in terms of finding the best plans that make the best cost effectiveness, energy efficient, and form and character, like they look really good for the community. And a pro is as well, like for something like secondary dwelling units, we don't actually need an architect. So architects don't actually need to be involved because it's one unit. And this would be the same for, say, an infill dwelling unit. So in future, it would be nice to get plans for row houses and infill dwelling units that are skinny, narrow things. Instead of being square or running across a lot, they would run down a lot, so that they were planned and oriented properly around code and fire separation for that use. So you don't need an architect. So really anybody can design these. Ideally, it's someone who knows code, can draft to scale. Cons, the cost. We have a limited yearly budget to do this. It's not attractive to designers. So who really knows what people might submit to us? It's even less attractive. So the RDNO contest wasn't that attractive to designers. Like, people were on the fence about submitting anything. They did end up getting 50 submissions. Awesome for them. I don't know how effective SICMUS would be. And it's kind of limited in terms of what a participant is willing to provide. So we might not be getting the best possible outcomes out of these plans because the incentives aren't really high enough for someone to do more. So as an alternative, we could just do an EOI to find a designer that's capable of doing what we want right now, which is secondary dwelling units. And then in future, as we get, say we receive grant funding or our next fiscal year, get other plans for other types of buildings. We are going to run into a point where we will need an architect. And in that case, we might want to contract with someone directly in that case. Another alternative is to allow design builders, so people who build, to submit their own work to have it pre-approved in terms of, but I'm not sure how we would incentivize a design builder to do that. Like, where's the pro for them in providing a free plan? Well,
I'm gonna say, I think the pro for that is having the homeowner has exactly what they want. They're not compromising by just putting another unit on. So I think it's still a win because now they're getting their own design and it works with their home and it may not be pre-planned, but I think that's a win for some homeowners that want
to do that.
do that. So I feel like that's still a win for them. And is it an option to, if you have an expression of interest and architects and designers submit their plans and you end up choosing 5 plans that are stock plans, could it be that they get, because as I first read that, I'm like $1,000 royalty per use. How about part of the fees or whatever that you're selling? You're not giving the plans, you're probably selling them. Could there be a portion of that then gets designated to, the royalty? In other words, if someone picks my plan, I get a $300 or $250 every time it's used. Not that it's not going to be huge, but at least it's an acknowledgement.
It is, but it sort of like defeats the whole purpose of incentivizing it. Like the idea was free. Plans are free. Or we would only charge like $100, $200 kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, so which was the idea of us buying them.
So maybe you don't buy them and maybe you pay the proponent. Like maybe you're just a flow through. Like you don't take the charge, you charge for it, but it flows through to even if it's $200. Like I feel like that's only because I'm a business person and I'm thinking outside the box.
I don't think it would work because I think they're still going to want to charge a lot more for those plants than $1 or $2.
You have a comment?
Yeah, sure. For me, I'd be interested with a low upfront cost of payments. I'd be interested in more in just kind of helping the community coming up with a library of say 5 plans or something. But if there was an incentive of say charging $500 for plans, like with Nord, they have the cash prices, but then the $1,000 royalty, all of that goes to the designer. And so every time the design is sold, that's why I took time to submit 3 to the court. So even if the upfront payment was fairly low, I would be more interested in something that pays royalty. And I think I get where you're coming from. You want to be able to at least free, but I think with $500 cost, they're talking about building something that's possibly $300,000. I think that's still fairly low.
I kind of agree with that it's a definite value and it's not a huge cost to add that value to your property to, if you're looking to spend.
Yeah, it's a concern. Like when we think about like a homeowner who doesn't really know a lot about it, right? They look at the cost of construction and then when they come in, they apply for a permit, they are super shocked by all the additional fees they have to pay. So in terms of a place to save someone money was this. Anyway, it's for discussion to kind of try to figure out what
I'd like to talk more about that down the road. Okay, yes, one more question. Yes.
I should mention too, if people are not going this route and getting their own design, they're paying way more than $500.
What are they paying?
So even stock plans through Jenish is a common one. Like they're going to be more than $500 for those ones. How much? I would say 1,000. If they're getting a custom design, they could be 3,000. The architect could be 10,000. Kind of varies all over the place, but definitely more than 5.
I think the DCCs is this, like all of those costs that pile up, that's what, as you walk in the door.
Sorry.
Okay, you have to go, okay. Okay, Siobhan, any comments?
Yeah, I like the idea of a stock library, or, especially for a secondary, little square buildings that, like you say, have the right facade and someone can just come in and go, they're not building their dream home, they're building, and again, that was one of the topics was how well the Vancouver special was when there was a housing crisis and they built and it literally, so, you know, Scott's got it for us, so I can come in, get my plan and, you know, I've just bypassed everything. I've got my DCCs sorted a little bit and off I go. You know, I think maybe when they're building fourplexes and things like that, or maybe row houses, that changes, but for the secondary suites and those kind of things, people aren't building their home. They're building a grandma suite or something they can rent or a mortgage helper, right? That's the way I feel about it.
Oh, do you have a comment? I'm just gonna say, so if a builder, most of these, I'm just gonna pull up, I guess, the scenario. So I want to do this. I want to hire, I need to hire a builder to do it for me. I can't just, so he's gonna come in, I'm gonna ask him to do all the permitting or whatever needs, all the applications. He's gonna come in. If he pays $500 for those plans, it's a pass through to the end user that really, it's value added. The having the plans is value added. So I don't know as giving them free is going to mean anything to the homeowner, because
You don't want the cost, I mean, this is a pretty small part of the cost.
Right.
You don't want the cost passed on to the renter. We're trying to get attainable housing. It'll be below market,
to the renter.
less than $1,300 a month for rent. We're talking $850 a month and under. When we look at our,
But like,
So
I'm gonna say, yeah, so yes, it adds to the cost, but if they're using a regular builder, like unless we've got a builder that's willing to do housing at minimal cost, I think there's more than just
I don't think that's the idea.
one
Like
piece.
property tax component.
Right.
That is meant like period of 5 years.
Right.
That's meant to help them pay off that construction cost
Okay,
while supporting an attainable rental rate rather than transferring on the cost of building that thing to a tenant who actually can't really afford, you know, $1,300 and more a month is too much. And that's considered to be really reasonable right now for a bachelor. But when you look at what our demographic can actually afford, it's way out of reach.
it is, and so I feel like this, is there any way that the province is gonna
Well, hopefully.
step up to the plate for this? Because I feel like putting it on the onus of just the homeowner, the resident. What's that? You're working on it, good. So because
Sitting here. even-
yes, okay, all right, good.
It's happening, actually, tomorrow's a very big day for us.
Oh, okay, good, because,
I throw something in after.
yeah, you can throw something in there.
But you're right. This is only one incentive. It's only like $500.
Okay,
That is, if Matt's into that, that's awesome. Right? So, yeah, I just had really high hopes, but that's okay.
okay,
We've got all these other incentives that people can stack that's going to help bring costs down of providing that unit initially. And it's a long-term investment, really. Anyway, someone shouldn't be looking at it as a quick win for income. Like it's a long-term investment.
it is,
Payoff.
yeah, agreed. And I think actually we should probably, if we could do I think we should do a pilot.
well,
I'm just gonna say, we need, let's do a pilot project. Let's take your property.
Sure.
Let's take your, no, my property. Let's, I feel like we need to, let's put some pencil, let's put some numbers to the paper. And because I feel like that's the reality of solving the problem, because if we
Well, you can then see where the problem,
see where the shortfalls are, or what's lacking and how,
and it's a good advertiser for the rest of the community too.
yeah.
Well, and this is partly where we were hoping the DOS-DC would like kind of leap in and kind of do a project or two, because the district does own a couple residential lots in the neighborhoods. It would be really, we just need to work with someone,
Right.
to trial that out, right? So it was part of the reason we invited Bobby. Maybe Bobby would be interested, but he wasn't able to make it.
Yeah.
Still haven't-
Yeah, I have an oversight.
know,
thought.
Partners. So it's interesting because to get our residential property owners
On board.
on board with this,
Need to demonstrate.
we need to demonstrate that it can be done, and two, how it works, what it looks like, how that piece comes together.
This is what we're not answering. What I'm-
Yeah.
And
Well,
Okay.
yeah, and
You have
that's where we
to
go.
design.
Yeah,
Can you put a price tag?
Yes.
Change a text
Yes,
to it.
right.
yes,
You can.
yes.
If it's $350 a square foot to construct, you know, this carriage house with a garage, if that's probably reasonable and is,
So there were parameters on the Nord competition. It couldn't be more than X per square foot. What was it, 220 to 320?
I think 300 was there. I know the submissions that I submitted were, we estimated around 200 per square foot. These costs though.
Yeah.
Everything's moving.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to nail down, but,
and with code and then attainable, sustainable and all the, you know, all the other parameters that are involved in this, those costs just like escalate.
Yeah,
That's why.
but those would be, that would,
So expensive.
Yes, yeah.
I think.
which is part of why we try to get pre-done plans. And so the district can control. We can reduce square footage. You don't need 2 bathrooms. You need 1. Do you know what I mean? So that it's like to try to keep that cost of providing it down while having a reasonable sized home for someone that's energy efficient and isn't going to cost a lot for them to run. So yeah, like, and that's why we're trying to get involved, I think.
Okay,
But I think Scott's right. He gave me a look. We should keep.
okay, let's keep moving.
Chair. So upcoming, there's some other pieces that I've been thinking about that tie into this. I don't know if we want to talk about it, but this fast track permitting process, this is something that's been in the works since this winter that Scott and I and Jeremy and Daryl, we've all been working on our bylaws around partially because council directed us to update our application forms and try to streamline our process. So it's all tied into updating these bylaws to try to, you know, build in exemptions and streamline things, get some delegation of authority from council so that things don't have to go to these meetings and potentially reduce costs because you're not paying for council decision, you're just paying for staff decision, for example. So this is all stuff that's going on in the background that you're not seeing today, but you know, later. So what else do we got in here? Right, a policy around rezonings for short-term rentals. Like when is council going to consider them, or will council consider them where certain conditions are met? So draft something that's in line with our housing strategy. So one idea there was that, sure, if you want to do a zoning amendment to allow short-term rentals on your residential property, you need to provide at least 1 secondary dwelling unit that has a housing agreement on it for a minimum 5 years. Again, like, we want to incentivize it. We don't want to disincentivize it. And that has to be provided for a worker in the community, and still trying to find a partner for how we would coordinate those rentals and make sure that whomever's renting it actually qualifies under that agreement. So this could be something where, you know, we were hoping maybe the DOSDC could work with us in providing a platform where rentals would be registered, and those particular units would only be accessible by an employer. So a local employer could rent the unit and then put a staff person in there, which would also potentially eliminate some concerns around terrible tenants, right? Because now, well, it's a worker, it's somebody's staff person. You know what I mean? That's something some piece is considering. For example, that came out of the Revelstoke Housing Summit. Yeah. So that was a great idea that came from there. Looking at coming up with a policy for utilizing district owned land. So under what conditions would the district part with land? Would we need covenants? Would it have to be a nonprofit society? Would we want to rezone it for purpose for rentals only? Like, coming up with some kind of policy around when district land, somebody approaches us wanting to use it for housing, what are the conditions in place to protect that long-term? Or is there a percentage of the land that has to be protected and the other percentage can be, you know, built out to finance the attainable part, for example? Looking at that, and then looking at, so this is something that I hoped to have ready for you, but I was being a little too ambitious, which is an infill zone. Too ambitious, an infill zone. So looking at doing overlays. So Edmonton does this where more than one zone applies to an area. And what it does is, instead of making properties non-conforming, so our base properties are all R1. So we would keep that R1, hopefully with our boosted density. And then people can rebuild and do whatever they need under that zone without applying a higher purpose zone to it that then, you know, you try to add density, well, now you have to comply with this other zone that's for something totally different. That doesn't work. So looking at overlays, so you have another zone on top that's say for townhouses, and maybe that's only on specific properties on specific road frontages where we can deal with parking and access appropriately, for example. And then maybe there's a second zone, or they're together, and we just call it an infill zone that's for townhouses, triplexes, and fourplexes / low-rise apartment buildings. 2 stories so that it fits in the neighborhood or within 10 meters, because our maximum height in the neighborhood is 10 meters. I don't know if you could fit 3 in that, but anyway. Interesting. So those are some ideas that maybe we'll have for this meeting upcoming. And these are all out of the strategy, by the way. You'll notice I've Okay, so BC Energy Step Code. I don't know if you want to take time to watch this video. There's a short 4-minute video. So the province is implementing this come May. So this is checking off a couple of our strategies and actions in our housing strategy. The province is doing this for us. We don't need to do anything. So this is going to address our wellness strategy around healthy homes, because anything new will have to meet this minimum standard for energy efficiency, which will help keep costs for maintenance, say heating and cooling that home, down, so that someone can afford to stay somewhere long-term, because they're not just paying rent, they're also paying for utilities, right? So this video is available on our website if you want to have a watch. And I do have the link down there. So it's under news, under post, BC Energy Step Code, May 2023.
Could you just email it to us?
I can email it to you.
That'll make it easy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We don't work.
So funding opportunities. This is what I ended up spending a lot of time on recently. So I think Councillor McCabe, he actually sent the link around letting us know about the webinar that was explaining the Housing Accelerator Fund. I had actually heard about it already from the CMHC. So I did attend that on the 6th. And it's pretty intriguing, actually. I think there's a lot of potential to get some funding to address, especially a lot of what Siobhan was saying around long-term grades and providing community amenities like parks, that kind of thing. So what is it? What does it apply to? It applies to action plans. We've got a strategy. We call it something different. Affordable housing, housing-related infrastructure, and community-related infrastructure. So community-related infrastructure, that's going to be our sewer, water, those things. This means that initiatives like implementing a medium density as of right zoning. So what they want to do is incentivize local governments to put in long-term changes that are going to remain effective after the end of the funding. So even after we've spent that money has been spent by the local government on long-term solutions that aren't just going to go away afterwards. So it's not specifically for funding, say, a grant program that once that money's gone, it's gone, and now we can't fund additional houses. It's more like we get our all that infrastructure that we need around it built up to support that density, for example. And they'll fund the work to do the assessment that we need to do to find out where we need to do that work. And then the leftover money that's left out of that funding, we can then use to actually do the work. So we can use it for land acquisitions, so acquiring land for housing, construction of affordable housing, active transportation, infrastructure that supports housing. Those are all things that it will allow, but not for a specific project necessarily. Clear about that. Don't come to us specifically with the Eagle Valley Senior Cell housing thing, not just a one-off. It needs to be in general. So I think that's why they're saying things like putting in zoning, for example. So are we ready to apply for this? I think we're pretty close. There's not a lot more work we need to do. We've done been doing a lot of work, and we're kind of ready for this. So we have a housing strategy, needs the action plan thing. We have a housing needs assessment already done. That was one of the things that you need to submit. And we have an active transportation network plan. That was I think that was endorsed by council last night. So we're ready. So what do we need to complete? Well, we need to have a clear targets at least 3 years into the future. So I've been working on that and I'll show you in a second some of the work around that. I'm still working on it. So we need to set per year targets. How many houses do we need? What type? How many bedrooms? How many units are they? Talking about multifamily buildings? Are we talking about secondary? And we need an array. So we need goals for multi-unit and affordable housing. So this housing accelerator fund is going to allow us to check off a bunch of things, achieve a bunch of things in our housing strategy, which is awesome. So here's some of the numbers. Here's the dark reality. This will be interesting for you, Tia, since you didn't get to see all this early on. So this is up-to-date information that I've been pulling all earlier this week. So here's what we're looking at for anticipated number of units we're going to need. So bachelor and 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and 4+ bedroom. And when we talk about 4+ bedroom, we're actually talking about roommates, unrelated roommates, typically, generally, when we look at our statistical data from Stats Canada. So this is what we actually have as of 2021 when our housing needs assessment was done. This is also when the data from the census is from. So this is what we needed. So for example, bachelor 1 bedroom units, we actually needed 415 units as of 2021 for our existing population at that time, and we only have 110. And this is not counting anything that's being used recreationally or seasonally. That doesn't come in. This is units occupied by their usual residents, which means those are units being used as long-term housing, regardless of whatever zoning says, right? So that's a shortfall of 305 units as of 2021. So in terms of projecting that into the future, where do we need to be, say, in 5 years, which is kind of the scope of our housing needs assessment when we do one? 536 units we need. We have 110. How many do we need to build a year? 107. Well, what are we actually building? Building permit data. This is where the dark truth is, guys. This is what we built in 2018, 19 units. 2021, we built 34 units. So far in 2023, we've built 5. And these are all single family dwelling units. These are not the kind of building types where we're going to see some of these other smaller units fall, right? So 1 duplex was built in 2021. Interestingly, secondary suites are actually starting to come up, which is fantastic. I'm starting to see people building secondaries. And these are ones under permit. There's a lot out there that exists that probably don't have permits. So if we roll out this incentive program with all these different tools, we're looking at, I hope to see this go up significantly. But you start looking at multifamily, 0 across the board, 2018 on, no multifamily. Pretty sad state of affairs. So, we look at this, we need to be building, what is this? 250 units a year to meet a very small projected growth. I think it's 7.6%.
Yes, Don?
Well, and none of them 3-bedroom houses.
Exactly, not 2-bedroom houses, because that's the other key point. Look what's being built, single detached houses. That's what's being built. There are 3-bedroom.
Yeah, I think those are predominantly people that are moving here, those homes, because I've been to most of them. But so the most productive thing to do would be to achieve 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment buildings. Like a couple of apartment buildings could really.
But this is per year. This is.
But it's a start. It's a start, and it's a great way to get that many units, because you could probably put. Right, no.
Just because we've got a seniors project coming and there's a component of however many family units, and the district is looking for a partner to do an additional housing development mixed use on Main Street, we're not going to be done. That's not going to.
Oh, no, it's not, but it's a quicker start. Right. So question on ALR land, because we are kind of landlocked with it. So, and it's a province, we know the whole province is under this same housing crisis. Is it something that municipalities can go to UBCM or go to Silga and start at Silga and say, can we unilaterally like lobby UBCM to make a difference with the ALR Land Commission? Like, is that a thing?
I think it's definitely a thing, and I think probably there's many municipalities who want to do that, and
Okay.
it's already stopped working.
Okay,
I guess one of the things that Sycamoose is, they did, so the Parksville subdivision that was removed from the agricultural land reserve to provide housing. Out by Boys with Toys Storage, there's big chunks of land there that were allowed to be removed to provide housing, and they haven't been built housing on. So I think if we went to the ALR tomorrow and said, hey, we want land out of the ALR, they'd look at you and say, no, you have to build these ones out first. You guys said you were gonna do this and you didn't do it, so why would we give you more land?
so is the Parksville property, I know that it was like staggered exit, like once you built this many units, then they would pull it out of the ALR. So have they pulled out the whole thing out of the ALR yet, or are we still on a staggered?
There's a multifamily lot that needs to be built out before they'll release the rest of the little single family lots. So they've maxed out as much as they can take out right now.
Okay.
All those new lots that are there, they're not in the ALR. I know our mapping isn't 100% up to date. But yeah, until that multifamily parcel is built.
So
That's it.
is the district incentivizing that, or are we trying to expedite, like, what are we, I shouldn't say we, because I'm not in the, no.
You're we.
I'm we.
We are
What are
we.
we doing to make that happen quicker?
Anytime anybody calls us, we do point it out. You know, people are looking for multifamily parcel, but she points it out. And the DOSTC, that's their job.
Well, so I think if you guys are looking for a partner, I think like, why don't we hammer, like, that's just me sitting here saying, why don't we hammer something out that makes a big difference, makes a huge impact, and makes a statement that the community's behind it, the DOSDC's behind it. We get a couple developers involved in it, or we build a bigger partnership. I don't know.
I think we need
Yes,
to
Scott?
how some of these initial forays into these go, and then we'll see what happens.
So
Something,
currently, there are a few things that are
Okay,
stable.
good.
That are under contract.
okay, good.
That are progressing very well. They've been in action now for about 6 weeks. I don't know. Feels like forever.
Okay,
Days like a year. You're like, let's do it. But I
It's
think that there's some great collaborations that are happening. The timing was perfect for when the private land was released for sale. I was able to attract the right buyers that fit the protocol that he was. The district is doing. And definitely it comes down to promotion and salesmanship to bring the developers in, because we are reaching beyond our reach. Now, the province recently also had a foreign buyers ban, which was implemented, which is now starting to roll back on a few things as well, which started at the beginning of the year, which enabled me to actually attract a lot of interest from the Lower Mainland that could no longer buy. And so what they've done, they've changed some of those, they change it all the time. It's constantly evolving on who can purchase. So they were saying that if you weren't a Canadian citizen, you couldn't buy in Vancouver. Right?
Right.
It's like, but we just immigrated, how many people?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Where are they supposed to live? Oh, now they're putting stress on the rentals.
Yeah.
Right, it's just all this.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
If you think about all those like little factors playing in anyways, the partnerships have begun. And that's the reason why I started participating a lot, because I get it.
Mhm.
We need to have the frontline sales that are out there selling land, educating themselves about what the district is doing to include that in our marketing proposals to get the right developers to come in. And that's how I function.
Okay,
I'm one of the few realtors I think that does that. And that's okay, everyone has their own thing. And their own
Yeah.
strategy. That's really what I want to specialize in, is bringing more doors so that we can grow healthily as a community. I agree with you with I love seeing the stat. I was just like, what I've been saying, when you were talking before about planning out for the 5 years, it's almost impossible in a lot of ways, and I do this too for sale. The reason being is right now, we don't have seniors housing. So we have a lot of seniors that are stuck in larger family homes, right? So we have this kind of bubble bump that's happening. We also have that large generational factor is turning into a senior when it comes to the population, right? When we look at the growth, am I right?
Yeah, well, this is why you look at these numbers in the yellow, you look at 3 bedroom. We have an excess of 265 units. So a lot of our seniors are living in those.
Mhm.
They need to move into bachelor and one bedrooms.
Yeah.
So that's why we have this huge need for these units. So once we move them in there, like
Everything else.
it'll even out. So it comes down within 5 years, we'll have 27 extra. And you know, a couple years after that, we'll probably be on par for single family, right? But it's these other areas where we need to build those to shift the population around
Switch it over.
and bring in families that are gonna work or commute to work. It'll be local. And
Well, here's the problem. Okay. I'm gonna tell you what I think the problem is though, because I'm just retired, you know, and I have a 3-bedroom home. And the issue is that, yes, I'll put a garden suite on my place. It's gonna cost me what, 200, you know, like a garden place for maybe me to move into, rent my house out for $900, right? Because I have to rent it for,
potentially, I mean, if it's a 2-bedroom, you're probably gonna be able to get more than that.
okay, but even, okay, say I get, it depends, $1,200. Okay,
You're not gonna have to. This is the thing, right? I just want to make sure you understand that.
okay,
You're just not gonna get some of these incentives if you're gonna charge out more.
right, but I can't even charge out because I'm a senior. I have,
Limited income.
it's gonna start affecting other things that I might, not that I'm getting these, but I'm just saying, a lot of these people are getting on their OAS, they're getting, they're under $20,000 a year, you know, their income, and they're not gonna rent their place up because then it's gonna put them, they're gonna get that income and it's gonna put them over and they're gonna lose their, you know, there's so much complex to this whole thing.
There's this other.
Why we gotta get you to move?
Why would I? Well, yes, but if I own my home that I've been in eventually 30 years, or maybe, you know, but maybe I would like to rent it out, you know, and move into this garden suite, which probably a lot of people would like to do that. But it's gonna cost them, you know, to build that garden suite. It's gonna take them, they're gonna be dead by the time it's paid for, right? I mean, and so you gotta look at all those things, you know?
That's an idea, which again takes partnerships, right? There's a couple ways to look at it. So I think Brenda and Councillor McCabe kind of came up with this idea where you have a program where seniors who like are needing to move into another place where their property is leveraged into, say, a land trust or something like that, but it's basically traded. So the district or a partner buys it from you. But at the same time, they're building units. So it's like you're exchanged. You're given a unit in exchange for your property, and whatever additional equity you've earned from that, you get that. And then it goes into a land trust or a co-op. And so now we're securing homes that are attainable in perpetuity, right? So someone can either buy that home and live there, but there'll be restrictions on equity, right? Because the land wouldn't belong to them, or it would be part of a co-op. So the first example was a land trust, the equity, or be part of a co-op where people can just cycle through a supply of houses as needed, as like they go through life stages. So that was one idea, right? The other idea that I came across was this design builder company out of Surrey or Vancouver called Hay City. And they do this model where they do micro ops, but they're aware of other builders who don't necessarily do a micro op. It's more of a strata. So they build a 6-unit building. The senior who owns the property gets a new unit out of it, still on the same property. And then the other units are sold. And so they kind of transfer. And so they own their property currently, and their new unit they would still own, and it would be more appropriate for them to age in place. So maybe it's a ground floor unit that's now built that they can roll in and out. Do you know what I mean? As needed, be more adaptable. So there's a few models, but again, it takes partnerships and partnering.
Well, and an incentive, because these people are, you know, that have lived in these places like myself, have been there for over 30 years, you know, or more.
Yeah.
And they're attached to them, you know, they're attached to that place, and when it's time for them to move, because they're probably paid, maybe their places are paid for, you know, so it doesn't really give them any incentive actually to leave there. right?
I mean, I guess the only incentive is that the values are up right now. So in terms
Well,
of.
if they're gonna get all this money, but they gotta have a place to go.
Well, exactly,
Right, so,
exactly.
yeah,
That's the thing, and if
Yeah.
you look at 10 years from now, because you're not there yet,
yeah,
not probably even on your radar yet about moving.
no,
But usually when people edge over 70 is when they start to think about relocation.
right, especially if they've got stairs or they've got, you know, and yeah,
Tired of the yard work, you
Yep,
know,
for sure.
stairs or whatever it is.
Yep.
And so we have that opportunity because we're looking at that now and to help that bubble move.
Yeah, so in terms of trying to do these infill zone over top, like trying to get some, amend the OCP, potentially bring in zoning over top. The district would be out of the way of these kind of partnerships happening. Where, do you know what I mean? But yeah, it's a matter of getting it out there.
Would a developer be interested in taking single residential R1 lot with a house on it? And when you, like in building a large building, say we build say a developer comes in and is building a 72 unit, 1 bedroom, 55 plus. And those people want to get into it and having. Yeah, no, it's just all about control. Sorry,
Yeah, well,
it's a bad idea. I'm just thinking, but
a co-op, but it's a good idea where you get like-minded people together
yes,
and you're pooling resources. to
Right.
build Something. So the design builder still makes their money off of it,
right,
but you're taking out the middleman.
yes,
And so it's more affordable for all these, for say, 6 families to get a new unit.
right.
And the person who's building and designing it is still making money, but you're not. It reduces costs. And I've got the tables and charts to show that I can show you. It's like, here's how the breakdown works when you do micro op versus doing stratas.
I think it's just got to be a win across the board, like, got to be for the developer, it's got to be for the person moving in. Like, it's got to be a win-win, because I think, the housing crisis happened because provincially and federally and whatever, and the shift went from building purpose-built rentals. So to build purpose-built rentals, and is that, if that's what we're going for,
Well, it's a mix of everything, I think, not just purpose, like, we're not throwing aside ownership.
no, but purpose-built rentals are really what we,
It's a big thing that.
it's a huge need.
At 9%, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the quickest, like you gotta look at, okay, we have this need right now,
Mhm.
so what is the quickest way to get into, to me, it would be these garden suites or your house being, like, that's getting them in, taking care of that need.
Short term.
Immediate, short term thing, yeah, but you gotta have a good incentive for them to do it.
You do, because you need probably 40 homeowners to buy into that program, and
That aren't.
I'm not sure.
rental.
That I'm not sure that's gonna happen,
But,
so,
and you've gotta show,
yes,
yes, if
that it
if
can.
in 5 years, because I'm not making any money, I haven't paid off my investment, I'm gonna switch to short-term rental, that's what I would do.
Mhm.
So first of all, short-term rental doesn't always pay more.
Hmm?
Short-term rental doesn't always pay more.
I was a short-term rental manager for 15 years.
In town.
Does it pay more than long-term rental?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And
I'm one.
the problem,
Is a week.
3 to
Yeah, but
400 to 600.
for 12 weeks of the
oh,
year.
gosh, yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
Right?
For
So
sure.
12 weeks of the
Hey,
year.
even though you might have somebody in there year round, like a short-term rental is only in there like to sleep. And so there's the wear and tear on your place for one thing. They're out boating, they're gone, they're gonna pay. I mean, they're paying big dollar
$600 a night.
out of the year and paying somebody like me, I was taking 25%. I did this for 15 years, made a great living at it.
So
But
that same place, how much, I'm just saying, if you look at it, yes, for that block of time, definitely more profitable, but when you look at it over the course of a year.
you're not much money, not,
For the utilities, you're no longer paying for your management, you're no longer paying for your sheets, your paper products and all the rest of
you're
it.
still,
Is it really?
if you get a good tenant there,
yeah.
yes. If you get a good tenant, you might make a couple $1,000s more on a long-term rental. That's it.
Okay, so It isn't necessarily, I just want to make sure the stigma is talked about. I really want us to start lobbying our provincial government
Well, the Tenancy Act has to change.
because it's not just about the money,
No.
it's the risk. And if we don't
Exactly.
lobbying, and if everyone, they have us all staring at, oh, you make more money, money. No. You make more money because you also don't take on more risk. And until they start altering the way that we handle tenancies.
That's the problem is you get nobody in there for a year and then you gotta redo your place for, you gotta spend 10,000, 15,000 for different.
Start that conversation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if they're not having that conversation with the province, I don't know who's going to.
We did have that, like we have in council.
Yeah.
We also, it has come up to be a topic at Silga. And we got to sit down with the premier and he told us straight out, they are not even looking at it and it will always be in a massive favor for the tenants. And I mean, I sold my rental place because I couldn't deal with, I had a fabulous tenant for a while and then my second tenant, it just trying to carry two mortgages and always just chasing, it became like.
Well, and the problem, like you said, there is no property management in this town and there hasn't been to look after that, you know, like.
Premier Evie said straight out,
Take that on.
not touching it. Now, I mean, there'll be election in 2 years, but.
Our direction about providing rental housing not be placed on the independent individual.
Right.
And shouldn't we be placing pressures on our government?
Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
That is the environment that they're creating. That is where our energy should be placed, in my opinion.
And that was, what at the
What we're
summit.
talking about right now are just short-term actions
Yes.
to try to increase housing while we work on these things.
And maybe in
Get funding.
in 5 years.
Figure it out. Right, exactly. Okay, these are just short-term actions of our strategy.
She's got to say something.
Matt, how long does it take you to build a house tomorrow?
Well, I don't know, but builders, I think usually around 8 months.
8 months.
Yeah.
And that's, so supplies are coming in and those kind of things are not a huge issue for us?
That's from like picking up your building permit.
Yeah.
To,
Moving in.
Do our side of it about 8 months from start to finish.
And if, what is the, like if today, what would a cost of a garden suite or something like that cost on? the property?
depending on the size, I think you could get in around the $200,000.
Okay, that's always pretty close on that.
What's the square footage of that? Like 20 by
Like 4 by
20?
40.
Well, that would be like.
Wow.
Yep.
With a base, okay,
Keep in mind, it's very.
yeah, minimal.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's got to be bare bones. It's got to be bare bones. Okay, so, all right, having said that, are we done this?
Yeah, I think we're done with this. Where are we at here?
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Seminars and conferences, I think we've already done our reporting back as we've encountered appropriate segues.
Can I?
Right. And
And I do have one thing to add.
okay, and I have one thing to say. You,
So just to give Sarah kudos and us, out of 160 towns, we were one of 25 that had started a housing committee, started dealing with the short-term rentals, getting things through council, talking about the plans. Our permitting was below. So out of 160, and that's including Vancouver and places like that, we were only one of 25 that were hitting the 5 things that they were saying, you guys need to get going. And it was like, really? Like, I'm like sick of this, which I was like, yay, sick of this, but I was like,
Yeah.
it was impressive. So thank you.
thank you. Okay, and all I'll say about attending the Revelstoke Housing Summit, it was key players, almost all resort designated municipalities that were there. So to be in the room and shoulder to shoulder with these people and having conversations was amazing. There was an après event where we all got to just like mingle and talk. And I think my biggest takeaway from that housing summit was a housing authority. And I really I've reached out actually to the mayor of Tofino because we are similar in population. They are for sure a resort designated municipality where we're not, but how they've addressed their housing strategy, but more so on the affordable housing. And they created a housing authority And they modeled it as much as they could after Whistler, because Whistler is such a huge success story. And meeting and talking with Marla was amazing. So I feel like that is, and it's a district, it's like the DOSDC. So whether it's a piece of the DOSDC or not, but a specific housing authority that addresses all the sectors, like the workforce housing, the affordable housing. I printed up, but I won't read it out now because it's kind of long. But I feel like that's absolutely a rabbit hole that we should run into, because we need that authority, and it's not funded by the district of Tofino. It would be funded by the rental units. It outsources, it's got only one employee, and it outsources the property management aspect to a property management company.
They own the unit.
But they own
Or the land.
they own the land, but they, anyways, I would really like to, I'm gonna send it to everybody because I feel like it's a key piece that we are missing, and
Is government basically taking a strong role in owning
it is.
the units? Yeah. And so, and this is an entity that would then kind of manage and coordinate.
Right.
And it would deal with the other parts too.
Yes.
Like things like any housing agreements that say the district secures through developments, they would monitor and make sure that people that were renting, say you had something that was specifically for workers, they would make sure the people that were renting it were specific workers. They would vet that.
And
And if there were houses that were being sold, because in Whistler,
yeah,
those houses all have covenants on them. It can only be sold to someone who works and lives in Whistler. And so they would be involved in all those sales.
see, and I don't know that they didn't adopt that kind of, they only adopted what was suitable to their small community,
Which was
Right.
smaller, yeah.
which I feel like lets their best practices, and they've had great success because they started a housing authority back in 2005, and it was too onerous and it wasn't doing its job, and it kind of fell apart. And then in 2017, or from 2016 to 2017, they did a whole bunch of surveys and gathered a bunch of data and proposed 3 different models. None of them worked, so they went back to their original, then talked and adopted what Whistler was doing, and to fit their own specific needs. And it seems to be working, and they do. I mean, they get an influx of a lot of people, but it's they partnered, and they build those relationships with like the bigger employers in town, the Twin Anchors, the Sycamoose Houseboats, those that need the housing. So anyways, I believe that it's something that we should, and maybe we get the DOSDC to go down that rabbit hole.
It'd be wonderful if they would be willing to.
Well, if they would have one of their board members, even if one of their,
Think all about community land,
Yeah.
investment, like otherwise in lieu of.
And it seems that all the communities that are successful right now with their housing strategies and being successful do have
a house,
that,
Authority.
yeah, that seems to be the key.
yeah, they have a
Housing authority.
authority, yeah.
So it's an entity under the local government. So it's
Right.
part of that operates at arm's length from council.
Right, but it can be a non-for-profit corporation is what theirs is, right? Yeah. So,
Okay, well, I'll
Okay.
like just so we can keep.
okay,
So this last thing that I attended, so this actually has to do with a BC housing initiative to support and get local governments to complete a complete communities analysis using GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And what the point of it is to figure out what your readiness is to support additional density and figure out which areas are ready to support that density, and like where should our medium density land use designation begin and end based on what we have for sewer and water mains, right? Where can we support that? So this was a conference held by the ICI Society, which is a society that collects data and supports GIS in the province. They actually do a lot of stuff for Sycamoose. They're pretty cool. I won't digress though and explain too much more about them, but so this was basically talking about that. So we heard from Urban Systems, which is actually preparing a guide for how to complete this analysis. as well as BC Housing, got some information about some grants and funding that may be coming out to help support this. It'll be interesting to see. It's something that I potentially could do, but we might also, because of time constraints on staff, like I said, there's funding coming out. So we may be able to hire someone to do this analysis for us. So in terms of our medium density land use designation, we'll see. We might want to hold off, but we also might not need to. But we can tie it to some actual information in terms of where our sewers are and where the zoning is and all that kind of thing. It'll be a key component in terms of, you know, looking at where we're talking about, where should we waive BCCs, where should we? Because we can tie it to the land use designation as well. We can make sure that that mapping reflects where it makes sense. So that's that. So other than that, we've got these other things. I can work on these things I presented in terms of getting them to the PDC and to council. This funding application, accelerator fund, I'll get that put together and finalize. The deadline to submit that is in the summer of this year. So that has to be done. So that'll be a priority. Future meetings, our next meeting will be July 6th, unless we need to reschedule for anything. Or we also have the option of adding an extra meeting if we need to. Our terms of reference.
I feel like,
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I feel like I would like another meeting. That's a long time to go without talking, because we like to talk. And we like to discuss stuff, but I feel like, you know, it's, yeah, sure, you can
Absolutely.
sit in on any of it.
No, these are all open, like you can lay it in online if you want.
That's, it's part of our, I think it could be part of our action as a committee. We need to stay engaged and we want to, you know, need to maybe planning and development comes in and does a presentation to us. Let's let them talk about it. Would love that.
Well, you're all welcome to come to the planning and committee meetings, of course. Yes. In terms of hearing what applications are coming forward. I know people are considering.
And they're online. So when you're
Yeah.
cooking at night or have nothing better to do, I always listen to them afterwards.
Okay,
Because it's hard. I'll send you the link.
okay.
Because they are, you know what I mean? That's like when I'm busy, then I click them on and then I can listen because it's hard for me to get here.
So the District of Sycamoose has a YouTube account and all our meetings that are live streamed currently are being recorded and are posted there. So you can go back and listen to all our old housing meetings if you want to do. All the old planning and development committee meetings is all there.
Lovely.
Yes. But you're thinking sooner. So just keep in mind, we're getting into the busy development season and I process a lot of those applications, just so you're aware.
Okay.
So I split my time.
Okay, if we don't do it, you won't be here?
But I can zoom in.
Okay.
You do.
But yeah, we don't have to have a heavy agenda. I feel like just being brought up to date, just just bring us up to date with what's going on and where everything's at.
When do you think
That,
end of May, early June?
Sure.
yeah, that,
Do you want the last Thursday in June? Or sorry,
last Thursday in May,
I am away.
okay,
first Thursday in June?
Thursday in June, I'm back.
first Thursday in June.
I might be back.
Where does that put? Are you looking, Brenda, to see where that puts us?
The 8th. I think it is.
I'll be back then too.
Yep.
8th. Oh, look, I have nothing going on that day.
Oh, you do.
It's too far in advance. I don't have any plans. Okay,
Hopefully I'll have really
good, yes, there you go.
That would be awesome.
What is it, April? Yeah. And then July 6th, you can hit us with some heavy stuff.
We'll see what we've got going by then. In terms of council updates.
Who is this guy? Can you make your logo?
This is Sassy Sasquatch. Part of our branding package. I adore her, so I brought her back. Do you want to call the meeting?
Oh, yes, I will. So recommendation that the Housing Committee meeting for April 13th, 2023 be adjourned, the time being 3:27. Can I have a seconder? Or a motion and a seconder?
Yes.
Siobhan, yeah, Siobhan and, okay. Thank you both for coming. It was great to have you and